Welcome to Rooting for You, a seasonal gardening podcast for non-experts. I'm Tess, and I know nothing.
And I'm Alyce, and I know some things.
Each week we'll chat about one gardening topic and then discuss the effort-reward payoff by asking, is the juice worth the squeeze? Just a heads up, there might be a bit of swearing in this episode. You've been warned. Hello from Melbourne, still in lockdown, still recording remotely, which, as you know, means we don't have our usual setup and our usual audio quality, but thank you for hanging in there with us. Today we're talking about year-round herbs. Now, technically, these are called perennial herbs, which I only know because of this podcast, but we're not into fancy gardening terms. We're into calling a spade a spade. So today, we're talking about herbs that just stay in the ground year-round. Now, I don't need to sell you on how fabulous herbs are. They are one of the absolute best ways to jazz up and bring flavour to a dish. But the number one reason that I love growing my own herbs is just because they're so expensive to buy. And also, how many times have you bought a bunch of herbs to only use a small portion and the rest just don't last the week? Don't love that waste. So Alyce, before you tell us about growing our own, can you just give us a little quick refresher on the types of herbs that fall into this year-round basket?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the perennial plant term is just a really fancy term for saying they will grow forever, effectively. So this is not all herbs we're talking about, but the ones we are rosemary, sage, thyme, mint, oregano, tarragon, and chives. There are more, of course, but they're kind of the popular ones that we use in our cuisine, so probably the ones that people will be looking at growing.
The big hitters.
The big hitters. Which one, if any, out of those do you have in your garden?
I have some thyme, some chives, some mint. I think that's all I have.
I reckon that would be my top three.
Oh, I also have rosemary as well.
I was thinking that, yeah. Sage is also a popular one. But yeah, I'd say mint, chives, thyme, top three. So these are a really great one for beginner gardeners to get started with because, as you say, you put them in once and they're in the garden forever. So it is like, you know, a little bit of effort and then you keep reaping the rewards ongoingly, which I love. And as you said at the start, like the financial investment in herbs and the fact that you never use them all and they're wrapped in plastic, it just is, you know, it's a no-brainer just to grow them yourself. And they're actually surprisingly easy to grow. One of the easiest things to grow. There's not a lot of pests and diseases that are going to cause problems for your herbs. I've never seen a slug eating my rosemary, for example. I find it's not their particular taste.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, again, like if there was probably only one thing edible that you would grow, I mean, I would say actually herbs should be the place to start. The other benefits of the herbs, not just to you and your cooking, is that perennial herbs are often really good for repelling pests in the garden because they don't like their really strong smells and their you know, the oils that they release. And they're also very appealing to beneficial insects and pollinators like bees.
That's amazing. It's really interesting that we all love herbs so much, but pests don't.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a funny thing that they do such a good job of repelling some insects and then do a great job of attracting others. So they just fit so nicely in the veggie patch for all those reasons.
An absolute crowd pleaser.
Yeah, I reckon. So as you said at the start, like there's really no reason to sell people on herbs. I think everyone loves them. So should we talk about how to grow them?
Yeah, definitely. And can we just touch on, just because when I was in an apartment with just my little balcony, I did have herbs. So I just want to do a little shout out for all of our people who are in apartments. How much space do you reckon you need just to have a pot of herbs?
Oh, small pot is fine. I would say, like, you want a different pot for each herb, but I mean, in an apartment with a balcony, definitely you could have, you know, the four. You could have a rosemary, a thyme, a mint, a chive.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, there's really no space, big or small. There are some herbs you can grow inside, but probably actually not that list. So we'll cover them another day. But if you've got the tiniest of balconies, there is space for the herbs.
Fabulous. Okay, let's get stuck into it.
Let's. Now, where are we going to plant our herbs? We can plant them in quite small pots. The thing is here is the smaller the pot, the smaller the plant. So if you are the type that uses one sprig of rosemary once a week, then perhaps a really tiny pot of rosemary is going to be fine for you. If you use a shitload of herbs, you might want bigger pots, so you get bigger plants. But again, because we're harvesting the leaves, I sound like a broken record here, but we can just keep the plant small and we're just going to have less of the leaves for our enjoyment. So I would say a 30 centimetre diameter pot would be what I would want to be growing in as a minimum. But honestly, you could grow them in a smaller pot and it would be totally fine. It's just going to be a little plant. You can grow them in the ground, which you know is my favourite way to do it. My only hesitation with that is they actually can get very big in the ground. So if you've got heaps of space, you might like that. But in a smaller garden, you actually might not want to give as much room to a rosemary bush. Tess, you've seen some of the photos of my rosemary bushes, and there is enough rosemary there for the entire of the Melbourne hospitality industry to keep using.
Well, the rosemary bush that I have was in from the previous owners in my backyard, and it is quite a big boy as well. How do you stop it from getting that big if you're going to put it in the ground?
Yeah, good question. I mean, you can prune them, but honestly, sometimes pruning them just encourages them to grow more. So,
Okay, so if you don't have a lot of space, maybe pots are for you.
yeah. I mean, with your big rosemary bush, it's not all a loss because that will flower and that will provide even more food for bees and attract more pollinators into the garden, which I know is something that you focus on. So it's not like it's a total loss if it's a massive rosemary bush, for example, but again, it just might be something to consider. I mean, the better the soil, the better the position as far as sun and the more water it gets will also mean it's a bigger bush. So if you want to put it in the ground and you want to keep it kind of small, I'd put it somewhere that isn't a prime position in the garden, and that will naturally kind of keep it a bit under wraps.
But part shade is okay?
Part shade is okay. Like full sun, you're going to get a better crop. But given how hardy they are, and given that we're not interested in having the hugest rosemary bush going around, part shade will be totally fine. The one caveat I will put here on planting is mint in particular can become very weedy. So if you planted mint in the corner of your raised veggie garden, you might think, oh, that's quite nice. I've got the mint next to, my carrots or whatever it is. You will find after a couple of years that your entire veggie box may be filled with mint. So you actually want to do two things. If you're going to put it in the garden, put it somewhere that is not, you're not fussed if you lose that space. And mint can grow really well in quite a lot of shade. Particularly mint can handle not full shade, but almost. So underneath trees or something like that, it can actually grow. If you are not growing it in a place that you can happy for it to kind of turn into a weed, definitely keep that one in a pot. Non-negotiable. So for me, I grow my mint in the ground, but I grow it in the chicken patch, like in the chicken yard, and even they can't destroy it. It's that much of a machine.
Do they try? Are they interested?
Oh, yeah, they were at the start. And they walk all over it. They smush it down. They do all things with it, but still it persists. So I can kind of use that weediness to my advantage, but for most people, that weediness is not going to be to their advantage. So keep that one in a pot. And speaking of, I really think it's important to grow the herbs in individual pots. You often see pretty pictures of like quite a large pot with different herbs in it. I think this is quite artistic looking, but I think in reality it doesn't work because one herb will always kind of dominate and then crowd out the other herbs. So you're going to end up, you might put 4 herbs in there, but you're only going to get a usable version of one herb that's going to become the boss, and then the rest of them, if they survive, aren't going to do very much. So keep them separate because we actually do want to be able to harvest all of the herbs that we're growing. But again, given they're small pots, I don't think that's too onerous on people.
No, I think that sounds fantastic. And also, you had them in small pots. It can just look just as cute.
Yeah, totally. And again, with pots, like you've got that advantage of, being able to move them around into sunny spots or less sunny spots or whatever it is. So, yeah, And because they're green all year round, you know, like some plants over winter obviously are deciduous and they look ugly. I mean, the fact that they're nice and green all year round means, as you say, they'll look pretty in their pots year round. So what are we going to plant? This comes back to the old seed or seedling debate. I would say with the perennial herbs, the year-round herbs, I'd always go seedlings. They're a bit difficult to grow from seeds and they take quite a long time. They're really cheap and available in seedlings, and it's just going to give you so much more of a head start on being able to harvest your herbs. And, you know, a $3 punnet of a seedling and you're going to have that rosemary or mint forever. I think the economies speak to it. So, you know, especially for a beginner, 100% just grab a seedling.
Now, can you refresh my memory on this? I feel like we spoke about it in the hardwood cutting episode. Could we do some of these? Did you call it? Is it a soft cutting?
Yeah, no, you bang on. The herbs are actually one of the easiest things to propagate. And I think it is called a softwood cutting, but then mint's a bit different. But you're totally, totally right. There is actually, we can grow herbs for free so easily. So something like rosemary, if you listen to our hardwood cutting episode and you took that exact same advice and did a sprig of rosemary, if you literally cut off a sprig, pull some of the needles off, for want of a better word, stick the part with the needles off in a punnet of soil, it will grow. Simple as that.
That is fantastic.
It is.
What's the best time of year to be doing that? In winter again?
I don't think it is for herbs. I think it might be spring, actually. Don't quote me on that. I need to look that up. But, I mean, the thing is with these, like, you actually can do them year round. Like, I did some salvia cuttings, which is a flower. I did that in winter and, like, you're not meant to. But, I mean, I would say, like, I got a 70 or 80% strike rate and that was in winter. So,
Fantastic.
Really, you could do it at all times. The only negative is that it's going to take a bit of time, obviously, for that plant to establish compared to if you'd got it from the nursery. The one that's actually offensively easy to get started with for free by propagating is mint. And we don't do that from a cutting. What we do is we do that from a root. So if you had mint in someone's garden and you liked that mint and wanted some, if you literally just dig up a piece of the root, and I'm talking like a 5 centimetre chunk of a root under the ground that looks like nothing that would be of value, if you put that in a little punnet and water that, you will have mint in no time. And that's why it's so weedy.
That's fantastic. Does it have to be like a pretty decent root, like the size of a straw maybe, or in like width I'm talking about?
Yeah. I wouldn't even, it doesn't even need to be this, no, not even as thick as a straw.
Okay.
I swear any bit, it'll go.
Mint's good.
Exactly. And mint is one of those things actually that I find that there's a lot of variation out there. So there's a lot of different types of mint and some are better for some things and some are better than others. Like I've got some mint in the garden that I would use for tea, but I wouldn't use it in a salad. It's like too pungent. So I find with mint, if you find one you really like and that's a variety that you like for whatever you use your mint for, grab the root and grow that because it's going to be, you're going to know exactly what you're going to get. Whereas the one you buy at the nursery, unless you're standing there eating some leaves while purchasing, which you know may not work for the nursery owner, you're not exactly going to know what kind of flavour you're going to get. So that's, again, the other benefit of propagating it yourself is you're going to get the exact DNA replica. So, you know, buy a $3 punnet or grow some yourself for free, but it really is economical. And also, I think it makes a really nice gift if you want to get enthusiastic and, you know, do a few punnets of mint at the same time. They'll probably all take and then you can gift them on. Spread the love.
Okay, so we've got them, however we've got them, whether we're starting from seeds or from the root, or we've gone and got the seedling, which is just a fantastic, easy way out sometimes. What next?
Well, when are we going to plant them? Spring is the best time because it's going to give the plant a really good shot at establishing itself. But honestly, you actually can do this any time of year. Mm-hmm. In winter, it's going to be a bit rougher on the plant. So, you know, it's ideal not to. In summer, the actual trouble you're going to have is just keeping the water up. But if you do that while the plant is young, it'll be fine too. If you're being organised, and again, we're having this chat in spring, do it in spring. But if you get to summer, you can still give it a crack and it's probably fine. But we're going for path of least resistance here, and spring is going to offer that because it's going to have the warmth, but it's still going to be moist, and then it's going to have a whole season of growing before it has to kind of survive the harsh winter again. Now we're going to plant them about 30 to 50 centimeters apart, again depending on how big you want them. So, and again, obviously if it's in a pot, then you're just going to plant one in the pot. And if you're using a pot, again, keep the soil, like use a good soil, because that plant is going to be in that pot for years and years. So the better the soil we start with, the longer we can actually go before we might need to repot that plant in a few years' time. So yeah, don't scoop your shitty soil out of your garden bed into the pot. Like use a good quality potting mix there. Or if you are going to make your own soil, like really enrich it with a lot of compost and things like that. Now, we have to water our plant. This is always the discussion. We have to keep up the water when it's young, when it's a seedling, right? This is exactly the same as episode 1, season 1, how to plant a plant. I mean, yeah, I don't even need to tell you how we're planting that seedling because you've done it in that episode, or you're planting a seed. But once you've got it in the ground, we just have to keep up the moisture, and we want those roots to really develop well. Once that plant has developed and kind of got its roots happening and got a bit of size to it, they're actually incredibly hardy and almost need no watering if they're in the ground. If they're in pots in summer, they will need some, just because pots are going to dry out so much faster, but they're really not a stressful crop at all. So that's another benefit, and one of the reasons why they are so easy to grow. And like the veggie discussion, if you stop watering your cucumbers for a couple of days, you're going to get some pretty crappy cucumbers because they've had that like moisture.
They've been stunted.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like, with your sprig of rosemary, if it doesn't get some water for a couple of days, that hardy stick is going to be totally fine.
So what other things might go wrong?
Nothing.
Okay, let me tell you about my mint.
Yeah.
Some of it gets a bit like there's still, maybe I'm not using it enough, but there's still like lots of leaves at the top, but then they get quite like sticky down the bottom. Do you think just prune them back a little bit?
Is your mint in quite intense shade?
It's a part sun area.
Because sometimes mint goes like that because it doesn't have enough sun, and what it's doing is kind of like our leggy seedlings discussion. It's stretching for the light.
Yes. Okay. Well, then it's in a pot, so I can move it around.
Move it. I think if you move it, you will into a sunnier spot. You'll actually see it change its growth pattern completely.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, and with herbs, you can be pretty brutal on the pruning. Like they're going to come back from it, and in fact, in many ways, pruning them hard can actually encourage growth in spring. So, don't be afraid to be rough with the herbs in these situations. And if it's looking, scraggly and shit, yeah, prune it back hard and it'll come back with vigor.
Now, I've got another question about chives and pruning those. If I'm wanting to add some chives to my meal, do you think it's best to snip off the top of all of them or snip the whole stem for just some of them?
Oh, interesting. I snip off the whole stem of some of them.
Okay.
That would, I think that would be the best option. But yes, interesting
And
question.
don't pull it out, just snip it and it'll come again?
Yeah, yep.
Cut and come again?
Cut and come again. So all these perennial herbs, actually, we're going to cut and come again, and we're going to cut, whether you call it a branch or a stick or some leaves, you're never, ever, ever going to interfere with the root system, and that plant will just grow back from where it was cut. You can harvest as little or as much as you like to a point. So the plant photosynthesizes through its leaves. So if you cut all the leaves off for your roast dinner, then there aren't any leaves left for that plant to photosynthesize. So you actually may kill it then. So I want you to harvest what you need, but if the plant looks like it's got one stick left and is almost non-existent, you've gone too hard. So you're going to plant it as a seedling. You're not going to be harvesting it for at least a month after that, but probably after a month in warm weather, it's going to be good to go.
So now with our plants in pots, if we go down that route, we obviously don't have the worms coming in and bringing all their wonderful nutrients with them. So how often would you recommend for, I don't know, is it liquid fertilizer that would be best here?
Liquid fertilizer, worm tea, any of the things, the liquids that we would use to feed pots, absolutely going to be wonderful for the herbs. I think you almost want to be careful though, because you don't want to give them too much and then they're just going to go bananas. Once a month in the warmer weather would be very lovely for those herbs. And yeah, worm tea or liquid fertilizer are going to be great. You can try and top up with some compost in the top of the pot, but obviously you're going to get, you're not going to get very far with that because the pot's going to get pretty full. So yeah, the liquid's the way to go. And if there was ever a time to actually be on the liquid fertilizer or the worm tea, it would be after you've planted the seedling. So for the few weeks after, even if you did it every 2 weeks, then that was just going to give that plant the best chance of establishing. I think the biggest problem people have with these, especially because they often plant herbs in small pots, is just that factor of, you get a really hot day and it's just going to dry out so quickly. So as long as you keep the water up to the pots, I really can't see anything else going wrong.
Would you recommend a self-watering pot for herbs as well?
Honestly, I recommend a self-watering pot for everything.
For anything.
Yeah. I feel like you can never go wrong with the self-watering pot.
Yeah.
So yes.
No, I mean, none of mine are in self-watering pots and they're all doing all right.
I can imagine you're a very conscientious waterer. I think with the smaller the pot, again, the more often you have to water it. So if you're going really small pots here, then my sense would be go the self-watering. That's going to, of course, that's, always just going to make life a little bit easier.
And now you mentioned a moment ago the concept of having to repot. How would you know if you needed to?
Yeah, I don't know if there's really a hard and fast rule with it, but what you'll find is after a few years, there's literally no soil left in that pot. It's just a pot of roots. And I mean, I think if the plant is still producing for you and you're still getting what you want from it, then I wouldn't worry. I think what you can see happen is plants can become less productive over time. So if you're noticing that your rosemary was giving you heaps last year and then now it's not, and you've given it a liquid fertilizer and you've kept the water up, then that would be the time that you need to pull it out and actually kind of shake off, kind of massage out those roots, get some fresh potting mix in there, maybe put it in a bigger pot. It's not going to be in the first couple of years, but again, I think it just, the plant will speak to you. The plant will tell you its needs.
Okay, but it's you're not doing it for the first couple of years though, so that's good to know.
Exactly. So we'll talk about this on the podcast in 3 years' time.
So the big question, is the juice worth the squeeze? This is where we look at the effort-reward ratio of today's topic. The categories are superstar, high effort, high reward. Completing this will make you feel like an absolute rock star. Best on ground, low effort, high reward. Quick wins and fill-ins, low effort, low reward. And finally, the wooden spoon, high effort, but not much reward.
Tess, I think I've got an inkling as to what direction you're going to go on the squeezy juice matrix here, but please tell me your thoughts.
I don't think we have ever spoken about anything that is more of a best on ground. And we go back to best on ground a lot because, everything that we talk about is just so fantastic. And as we're discovering, not super difficult for the topics that we've been choosing so far, but what I love most about the year-round herbs is just they're year-round. You don't need to repot them or also redo them every spring because they'll still be there. It's so wonderful. I friggin' love going out to my garden and just picking a few sprigs for dinner. I just feel so chuffed with myself that it's not something that I bought from the supermarket. I just think herbs are really super fantastic.
I could not agree more. And if I could have a whole garden full of perennials that I only had to plant once and then tend to, and I could feed myself off that, I 100% would. I'm such a fan of them. And as you say, it's such a lovely thing to be able to just constantly access them and constantly know you've just done a tiny bit for the cause. And, they're going to be fresh and delicious. You're not going to pull them out of the crisper from 2 weeks ago and hoping you can salvage that sad time you've got in there. I think you're right. If there's ever a time for a best on ground, it surprises me that we've got to season 3 and not talked about it. But that does come down to the fact that spring is the time to plant.
And look, the thing I learned today about the pests, how good's that? They don't even like them.
Exactly. Don't even worry about slugs and snails.
Yeah. One more question that's just popped into my mind. Can we talk a little bit about drying herbs and what the process is there and why you might be interested in doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Dried herbs are great. They're beautiful to have in your house. It makes the house smell great, and it's good for keeping, moss, like pantry moss and clothes moss that you can get in the house, and you usually would buy those horrible mothballs. Having herbs in the same way that they keep pests out of the garden, they can also keep pests out of your
wardrobe? Well, that's pretty cool.
Out of your undie drawer, so they say. I also use dried herbs in my chicken nesting boxes is another example of to keep not bad, but unwanted insects out of there. So again, there's so many uses for them. And it's so easy to do. All you do is just cut your herbs as you would if you were going to use them in your dinner, and then get some string and just tie them into a bunch and then hang that somewhere. Mm-hmm. So I know I've told you how to dry your belly buttons before. It's exactly the same process. So we want to just hang them because we want the airflow to be kind of 360 around the herbs. And when you have them laying down, that's not going to encourage the full airflow. And by hanging them upside down, it also keeps them nice and straight. So if you then want to have them in a vase or something like that, it just keeps everything looking good. But you can also bring herbs into the house and have them in a vase in water as well, and they'll last for a couple of weeks.
They're quite nice smelling. You can pop them in the bathroom.
Exactly.
Lovely.
Exactly. So yeah, we haven't even covered off on all the uses of herbs in the house and the garden, but just adds to them being best on ground.
Absolutely. Best on ground for the win. Rooting for You is hosted by Alyce and Tess. Artwork by Lauren Janine. You can find us on Instagram @rootingforyoupod or email rootingforyou@alycealexandra.com. And remember, we are rooting for you.